With tariffs suffocating imports, supply chains being still a mess, and capital no longer cheap, valuations for e-commerce brands have crashed to all-time lows. In fact, if you tried to explore an exit recently, you might have realized that your brand is worth a fraction of what it might have been just a few years ago. And yet so many founders are still operating under the illusion that they can sell for 2021 prices, retire and exit. Just like all other founders, you have so many questions popping up in your mind. Should I sell my brand? Should I sunset it and move on? Or maybe hire someone else and finally breathe again? That's why I'm going to walk you through the 5 key reasons why it might be the time to either sell or sunset your e-commerce brand. Because not every brand will attract a buyer. So the smartest move is to gradually shut things down, pull out your remaining cash, and walk away with a peace of mind rather than grind yourself into burnout chasing an unrealistic exit. This is because running a struggling e-commerce brand can lead to chronic stress, burnout, and serious health issues like anxiety, while also straining family relationships through financial pressure. Let's start with one of the biggest red flags for any e-commerce business. On the surface, it might seem like just a numbers problem, but when your margins disappear, you're really looking at a systematic issue that affects every part of your brand. In e-commerce, your profit margin tells you how much of your revenue is left after covering your costs. It's the ultimate metric for financial health. If that margin dips below 5%, you're playing a dangerous game. At that point, you're surviving week to week. Over the past few years, and especially the last few months, that margin has come under even more attack from multiple fronts, such as tariffs and inflation. Whether it's US-China trade tensions or EU tariffs revisions, brand owners are paying more just to bring products into their home markets. In some niches like electronics, supplements, or consumer goods, these added costs can be the difference between profit and loss, between surviving and dying. Now, we're facing fuel surcharges, warehousing delays, and inventory holdup, especially if you're relying on overseas manufacturing. Add that to ongoing geopolitical uncertainty in regions like China, India and Pakistan now, Middle East, your logistics pipeline becomes both expensive and unstable. And on top of that, let's not forget marketing costs. In 2020 and 2021, ROAS, return on ad spend, was through the roof because consumers were stuck at home and flush with stimulus cash. But today, iOS privacy changes, flooded content out there, CPM inflation, and platform saturation mean it takes way more money to convert a customer. Paid media, especially Meta and Google, is no longer a reliable engine unless you've already deeply optimized it or operating at scale. So what happens when your costs rise and your revenue shrinks? Now, do let me know if you've gotten some value out of the video already. Please hit the like button. So now, what happens when your costs rise and your revenue shrinks? I've been in the trenches too. I've built and scaled the largest CBD marketplace in the UK and Europe. I also acquired and grew a consumer brand to 8 figures and have worked with over 30 e-commerce brands with my agency. I know how brutal this market has become because I've lived it from every single angle: investor, founder, operator, buyer, and advisor. Based on my experience, I can tell you that if your margins are consistently unsustainable, it might be time to consider selling. You don't have to wait until the business crashes. If you have a strong customer base, a unique product, or a good brand, there may be a buyer who can step in with the capital, expertise, or scale to turn your brand around. But this does not mean everyone with thin margins should rush to sell. You should consider some alternatives as well. First, you can look at cost reduction strategies. These include reworking fulfillment, renegotiating supplier contracts, or consolidating ad spend. You can explore pricing adjustments to better reflect today's costs, or you can optimize your conversion rate optimization, your website, maybe boost your AOV a bit and just increase your LTV, your lifetime value. But if you tried all of those things and your business is still barely scraping by, it's time for a serious evaluation. You can't scale a business that's structurally unprofitable, and grinding yourself into exhaustion just to not fail is simply wasteful. In some cases, you might also consider sunsetting the brand. closing it down and salvaging what you can. Or maybe bringing in a partner or operator to stabilize and improve the business while you take a step back. All of those are valid points. But if you simply want a break or even just want to understand your options, I've put together a brand exit checklist. The checklist in the description below includes every key decision point, valuation lever, and preparation guide to make sure you're optimizing your exit and not leaving money on the table. Now, coming back to the next reason, which is even more personal. I'm talking about the part of running a struggling e-commerce brand that doesn't show up in spreadsheets. This reason is behind every product launch, every delayed shipment, or customer complaint. In today's environment, that pressure is even more intense. If you're out of stock for weeks because a container got held up in customs, you lose sales, ranking, and customer trust. Then you spend the next month trying to recover. This overwhelming operational stress is the second biggest reason for selling your e-commerce brand. This level of stress isn't sustainable. As a founder, you'll feel this emotional toll everywhere. When I say everywhere, I mean in decision fatigue, resentment toward the business, which eventually leads to burnout. This burnout then causes severe health problems. For example, emotional toll can increase your cortisol levels, which then leads to severe issues, including high blood pressure, weakened immune function, insomnia, and fatigue. Not only health, but it can also cause family problems. A study from the Harvard Business Review found that entrepreneurs are 2 times more likely to divorce than the general population. When a brand is struggling, many founders dip into personal and family savings, and this creates tension with partners or spouses, especially if there is no clear exit strategy. Before jumping to sell, you do have alternatives. You could hire a general manager, you could outsource operations, you could restructure your week and delegate more. But if you tried all of that and still feel buried, selling might be the smartest decision you can make. Now, maybe it's not just you feeling overwhelmed. Maybe the entire market you're in is feeling overcrowded, underpriced, or just done. That brings us to the third reason to sell your e-commerce brand. During the COVID boom, people were buying anything and everything online. Brands selling fitness equipment, home office gear, pet supplies, and supplements. But fast forward today, and consumer behavior has dramatically shifted. It's not just demand that's the issue. The market is often oversaturated too. When too many similar brands flood a space, it becomes nearly impossible to differentiate yourself. It gets even more challenging after new regulations, tariffs, and geopolitical tensions. For example, if you're importing goods from China, rising tariffs or export restrictions can immediately slash profitability or delay fulfillment. But you might be asking, Alexej, what do you do when the market simply isn't working anymore? Well, sometimes the best move is to sell, especially to a larger player who can operate at scale. They may already have the logistics, team, or regulatory infrastructure in place to make the business viable again. Take a niche beauty brand as an example. The brand struggled post-COVID due to increased competition and rising fulfillment costs. The founder realized she couldn't afford to compete with global brands on a shipping speed on ad spend. Instead of burning out or going bankrupt, she sold the brand to a competitor who already had in-house fulfillment network and a regulatory team. Now, if you're seeing signs of saturation or declining demand, but you're not ready to sell immediately, you can consider some other options too. For instance, you can pivot your product line, serve a new audience, innovate your marketing, or introduce subscription models. Now, even if you've accepted that the market is saturated or demand is fading, you might still try to push forward. But what happens when you're running out of time and money? This is what brings us to the next big reason. For many brand owners, it's not just the market that's drying up, it's the bank account. When debt starts piling up and the numbers no longer work, the question isn't just should you sell, it's can you afford not to sell? This is because mounting debt or cash flow issues can become a double-edged sword for founders. At one point, it was a growth lever. You took out a loan to bulk order inventory, jumped on revenue-based financing to scale ad spend, or signed off on a line of credit to hire that first operations manager. But it only made sense during the boom days. In today's market, slowed sales and ballooning expenses have turned those debts into anchors. Manageable repayments now feel suffocating, especially when revenue isn't predictable. You're still paying off last year's Black Friday inventory while this year's demand is flat. Ad platforms like Meta and Google have raised costs, and the once reliable ROAS has become volatile. Meanwhile, other fixed expenses like tariffs, fulfillment fees, and warehousing don't slow down just because your sales do. These are the consequences of cash flow issues, and it's highly dangerous to tackle these problems as a founder. Many solid operators are in this exact position because the market flipped so fast. What worked 2 years ago is now a liability. And without a deep pocket of external capital, it becomes nearly impossible to climb out of that debt spiral on your own. So why should you sell your brand? There are multiple reasons. Now, first, selling allows you to pay off existing debt. Selling your brand, especially if it has valuable assets like a strong product line, established supply chains, a loyal customer base, or defensible IP, can generate enough capital to settle outstanding loans, credit lines, or supply debts. Second, selling can help avoid default or bankruptcy, which can affect your personal credit, especially if you've signed personal guarantees, your future access to financing, and your emotional well-being. It can take years to recover. Selling the business before reaching that point allows you to preserve optionality. Even if the sale price is lower than you've hoped for, it's still a way to exit on your own terms without legal complications or financial ruin. That means you can still walk away with a meaningful lump sum or a clean sheet. Even if it's not a retirement level exit, it's fine. That lump sum can become your bridge to the next chapter, whether that's launching a new, more passion-aligned brand, investing in another venture, or simply taking time off to regroup and reassess. But sometimes the reason for selling your e-commerce brand becomes even harder to ignore. This is what leads us to reason number 5. Many founders start their e-commerce journey with a big vision and an excitement to build something meaningful. Maybe even a mission to change the category or solve a problem they deeply understand. But over time, that passion can fade, especially when you're constantly firefighting, adjusting to economic pressure, or making decisions that clash with your original values just to survive. When the markets turn tough, founders are often forced to cut corners to stay alive. Cheaper suppliers, smaller teams, lower quality control. You doing all the work. You look at your product, your marketing, your customer feedback, and it feels like you're just checking boxes and grinding. In this situation, the best move is to sell your brand because it no longer aligns with your goals and values. Let me share something personal with you. Back in 2023, I made the difficult decision to shut down my first e-commerce business, Alpha Green. It was the largest CBD marketplace in the UK and Europe. We had built something big, but by mid-2023, it became clear that the economics just weren't working anymore. Joe Biden had backtracked on the promise to legalize THC in the US, which hit the global outlook for CBD, hard, and our unit economics. Cash was draining fast, profitability seemed more and more out of reach, and we faced the hard truth. There was no point trying to sell something that simply wasn't viable anymore. So instead of chasing a fantasy, we chose to sunset the business, wind it down carefully, protect what value was left, reinvest energy elsewhere, benefit from the learnings, benefit from the team. And that's when we decided to acquire a different brand, one with a healthier foundation and clearer path to profitability. It wasn't easy, but shutting that first business down turned out to be one of the most important decisions we've ever made. And since then, we've scaled that one brand to 8x in 3 years. If your brand no longer aligns with your vision, your values, or the kind of life you want to lead, it's okay to acknowledge that and sell it. So take a moment and ask yourself, is this brand still serving the life you want? Or are you serving the brand at the expense of everything else? Are you holding out because of strategy or just out of fear?